In the quiet corners of Greek mythology, far from the glamour of shining gods and heroic quests, being a king was far less glorious than the stories make it sound, and in truth, it often sucked in ways that would keep anyone awake at night, which is ironic because this version is meant to make you fall asleep. Imagine ruling a kingdom where the people expect you to be wise, brave, generous, magically protected, and somehow also good at navigating the chaotic drama caused by gods who treated mortals like chess pieces. Greek kings were constantly sandwiched between the impossible demands of their subjects and the unpredictable temper of divine beings, which meant waking up every morning not knowing if the harvest would fail, if an oracle would ruin your day with a vague prophecy, or if Zeus would throw a thunderbolt your way just because he felt like it. Many kings inherited thrones through curses rather than blessings, and the lands they ruled were often soaked in ancient feuds, generational bloodlines, and destinies they never asked for. Take Agamemnon, for example, a king who had to sacrifice his own daughter just to get good wind for his ships, a horrifying decision pressed on him by a prophecy and the ego of the gods. Imagine being a ruler with no real control over your own family, let alone the sea. And even after leading the entire Greek army against Troy, he returned home only to be murdered in his bathtub. That's the kind of job performance review no king ever wants. Or consider Oedipus, who genuinely tried to be a good king but unknowingly fulfilled a prophecy by killing his father and marrying his mother. Instead of guidance, he got riddles from sphinxes and cryptic warnings that never helped, until it was already too late, proving that in Greek mythology, even the kings most determined to do the right thing were doomed by the fine print of fate. And then there's King Midas, who thought he scored the greatest wish ever, everything he touched turning to gold until he realized he couldn't eat, hug his daughter, or even sit down without causing a disaster. Instead of celebrating wealth, he found himself alone in a golden prison of his own making, showing how Greek kings often suffered because of their own desires just as much as the gods' cruelty. For many rulers, prophecies were less like guidance and more like ticking time bombs. Consider King Laius, cursed from the moment he became a father, destined to be killed by his son. Trying to escape destiny only made it happen faster, because, in Greek mythology, the universe seemed obsessed with proving that no king, no matter how powerful, could ever outsmart fate. Kings ruled lands filled with monsters the gods rarely bothered to deal with themselves. Even mighty rulers like Minos had to deal with disasters like the Minotaur, a terrifying creature locked inside a labyrinth that he had to pretend was under control, even though it was a living problem spawned from divine punishment. Being a king meant keeping appearances, pretending everything was fine even when a half-man, half-bull creature was wandering beneath your palace eating citizens. And kings faced heroes too. Yes, heroes were a problem because every hero eventually wanted glory, quests, or revenge that usually involved destabilizing kingdoms. Take King Eurystheus, who spent his entire life terrified of Hercules, the strongest man alive, and who hid inside a jar whenever the hero brought back another monstrous trophy. Imagine being so scared of your employee that you spend more time in a clay pot than on your throne. Even kings who tried staying humble weren't safe. Priam of Troy ruled for decades with patience, wisdom, and kindness, yet still watched his city burn. His sons die, and his legacy crumble because of a conflict started by the gods over a golden apple. No matter how hard a king tried, destiny had already written the ending, usually in tears. For Greek kings, family life was another nightmare. Their children were often cursed, kidnapped by gods, transformed into animals, or destined to overthrow them. Wives could be loyal, treacherous, vengeful, or cursed themselves. The royal household was less like a family and more like a ticking prophecy machine waiting to explode. Even the simplest decisions had cosmic consequences, and kings had to rely on oracles whose prophecies were always vague enough to be misunderstood. Do not drink the water when the moon rises, an oracle might say, but leave out the part where the real danger is your cousin plotting a coup. Greek kings also had to host gods disguised as mortals, because refusing hospitality was a guaranteed way to get smited. This meant every stranger knocking on the door could secretly be Zeus testing your manners, or Poseidon checking if you'd feed him properly. Kings had to be polite, even when they wanted peace and quiet, because one rude moment could condemn their whole kingdom. The economy wasn't easy either, as kings often ruled lands devastated by plagues, droughts, or divine punishments. Crops failed not because of bad policy, but because gods were having arguments somewhere on Mount Olympus. When Apollo sent a plague, a king couldn't simply distribute medicine. He had to guess which god he offended and pray he figured it out before everyone died. Imagine being a leader whose biggest responsibility was making sure the gods were in a good mood. Kings also had no real retirement plan. They ruled until they died, usually violently. Their deaths were rarely peaceful, often involving betrayal, monsters, revenge, or dramatic irony. The universe seemed determined to make sure every king's story ended with a lesson people would whisper for generations. But despite all the chaos, kings in Greek mythology kept trying. They led armies, built cities, solved impossible problems, and tried their best to keep balance between mortals and gods. They were overworked, under-rewarded, and constantly tormented by forces beyond their control. In many ways, Greek mythology uses kings to remind us that power isn't the blessing it appears to be. It's heavy, exhausting, and often tragic. And yet, when we look at these ancient stories now, softened by time and retold in quiet, nighttime tones, the chaos becomes strangely soothing. There's something comforting about knowing that even legendary kings struggled, and that their lives filled with impossible expectations, confusing prophecies, and divine troublemakers make our own problems seem much more manageable. So as you drift into sleep, imagine those ancient rulers trying to keep their kingdoms together, navigating storms caused by God's heroes, curses, and fate itself.